Well, former Labour official Richard Power Sayeed joins us now. Richard, let's go straight to Suella Braverman, causing yet more trouble for the Prime Minister. Of course, front page of the Telegraph, as Sarah said. She talks about this is a reversioned plan. It's a failed plan which is being reworked. This won't get the flights off the ground. Rishi Sunak, actually, when I watched him, it was the most prime ministerial I've ever seen him. He talked about going from an agreement to a treaty, bringing in extraordinary legislation immediately. This is a major problem for the Conservative Party.
Well, it's a major problem for Rishi Sunak because, of course, Suella Braverman's in an easy position, right? She's not trying to solve a policy problem. She's campaigning to become the next leader of the opposition. It's a much easier situation for her to be in. She doesn't need to make things better or find way through technical problems. She's in her happy place, right?
Happy place, but writing furiously this week,
I'm sure she's enjoying it.
Well, she's got a five-point plan. She set it out. She's told the Prime Minister what he should do.
Five-point plans. I mean, look, she'd be much happier if she was sitting here as a pundit, right? She'd be much better at that job. The technicalities of actually governing a country are not particularly what she's into. Rishi Sunak, if he's clever, is just going to throw this into the courts and play it for the next year and a half until the next election as an argument where he can say he's in the right and he's fighting for whatever it is he thinks he's fighting against the unelected judges, unelected lords. That's the clever thing that he can do because he's definitely not going to actually change the policy.
But he's pinned his reputation on this, hasn't he, on stopping the boats, and the Rwanda flights are seen as central to that. If you're going to stop people getting on boats, you need to tell them that if you arrive here, you're going to be shipped off to Rwanda.
Well,
if he can't do that before the election, how's that going to play out? Well,
what you just described there is, of course, the premise of Suella Braverman's policy and, to some extent, the government's. But actually, we know why people are going on boats. It's not because of a lack of Rwanda flights. It's because there are no other ways for them to come to this country safely to apply for asylum. And there are kind of a number of facts that the government just can't really negotiate with. There are lots of people in this world who need to leave the place they're in because they're in danger. Some of them have got reasons which legally give them the right to asylum and some of them don't, but they're all very desperate. Quite a lot of them speak English. Quite a lot of them have got relatives or friends here who will be able to help them get a job, something like that. And so a small number of those people in the world want to come to the UK. And then on top of that, there is the fact that the government could change, which is that they've cut off all of the legal routes to coming here. That's why the number of small boats has gone up.
Can I just ask you, in terms of the appointment of David Cameron, there was an article this morning, I think in one of the newspapers, I think it was the Telegraph, saying that actually whilst Cameron is there is no chance of us leaving the ECHR. What Suella Braverman is saying, we need emergency legislation to block all avenues of legal challenge. That includes all human rights laws, all European courts. Now, with Cameron there is no way that is going to happen, is there?
David Cameron isn't the thing that's blocking that. The thing that's blocking that is that the British people are fundamentally decent, and there's actually only a very small proportion of people who want to see that kind of legal change. They're the people who Suella Braverman is talking to, because, like I said, she just wants to be the next leader of the opposition. She doesn't want to be the person who's dealing with this policy problem.
Can I ask you about Labour's own policy problems at the moment, and a difficult week as well for Keir Starmer with a frontbench rebellion, losing the likes of Jess Phillips from his front bench. Is he right to stick to his same path when it comes to not discussing a ceasefire and talking about humanitarian pauses? He's been accused in the past of flip-flopping, hasn't he? Are we seeing him here as a Prime Minister in waiting, or is there a danger that actually he's totally ignoring the views of those within his own party and the constituents they represent? Jess Phillips talking about the thousands of emails she's had on this issue this week.
Well, those thousands of emails reflect what I think is most important in this situation, which is not what's happening in Westminster or in the Labour Party, but what's happening in the Middle East, the evils that Hamas committed in October, and then the terrible deaths of children and innocent people in Gaza right now, the people who can't access medical care when they're desperate, people who can't get enough food and water. That's what we should be focusing on. And I think Keir's, very reasonable approach is to say, I want to be the next Prime Minister. I'm not here to campaign for something that isn't going to happen, a ceasefire. I'm here to put forward myself as somebody who's demanding the possible.
So
and I think
frontbenchers have resigned in vain?
Well, I would say, I mean, yes, I think so. Or rather, I think most of them have resigned because they are making a point of principle, they are sending a message to their constituents, and those are reasonable things for an MP to do.
And that, I think, is the really important point here, because there was a three-line whip. It wasn't about voting with your conscience here, was it? There was a three-line whip to vote for a ceasefire. I think you're right in that this isn't actually necessarily about the unity of the Labour Party. This is about MPs who have high Muslim populations really frightened about what's going to happen to their seats and their electoral prospects.
I mean, I think that the voting, the polling that we've seen, limited that it is, suggests that actually this isn't going to be the thing that changes Muslim voters' minds. It's, I think, the poll that came out yesterday, or a couple of days ago, showed it to be still only fourth on the priority list of Muslim voters. So it's something that some people really do care about very much, but it's not going to decide the electoral results of the country, or indeed the Labour Party. But like I say, this is like, we're a month on from this absolutely terrible conflict beginning, and we've got onto this horrible place in the media cycle where we do this really parochial thing of thinking, like, how's it going to impact on Keir Starmer and Jess Phillips? I care about Keir and Jess, right? But I don't really care about, like, how the conflict impacts on them. There are people dying right now, and, I would like to see a ceasefire, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Can I just ask you about the polling which you bring up? There are two polls that I saw, Britain Elects and also Election Maps. Labour has a convincing lead, we know that, I mean, significant lead. But the Labour Party's lead is softening, it seems. The Conservatives are absolutely in serious trouble here, down 2 points according to one poll at 21%. Another one puts them below 20%. Now, as a result of that, Jeremy Hunt has issued quite, I think what people would say are quite draconian rules, or at least he's going to announce these in terms of welfare, saying we need to cut down on the number of people who are claiming benefits in this country. You need to look for work. If you don't look for work, you'll be penalised. That's red meat to the Tory party, isn't it?
So there's two things there. Firstly, with the polling difference between Labour and the Conservatives, I mean, I think that the polling average suggests that actually the gap between the two is pretty steady. Maybe it's softening a tiny bit, but you would expect that at this point in the electoral cycle, as we're just starting to head towards an election. I don't think anyone thinks that the gap isn't going to narrow a tiny bit. It's just a question of whether it narrows a tiny bit or a significant amount, but it's not going to narrow totally. On this Jeremy Hunt policy proposal, I think the thing that we really need to remember is that, sure, there are always quite a lot of people, a significant number of people in this country who are unemployed.
8.78 million people economically inactive.
More than 10%.
OK, so economically inactive and unemployed are slightly different things, but,
yep.
but either way, whichever stat we look at, the really important thing to remember is that who those people are is actually constantly changing, because the vast majority of unemployed people are only unemployed for a very brief period. They go between one job, then another, then another. The gap in between, they need to get benefits, right? There is a very small number of people, a very small proportion of that larger group who are long-term unemployed. The vast majority of them have got really big problems in their life, as in really big family problems, really big mental health problems, sure, often disabilities, but disabilities which they're not getting benefits for. Now, does something need to be done to support those people? Absolutely. Is the right solution to that penalising them and potentially taking away their prescriptions?
Well, I was going to say, will Labour weaponise this when it is announced? Will they then say, well, this is the return to the nasty party?
I don't think you'll need Labour to do that for them. I mean, if you go and ask people, do you like the fact that, like, dozens of disabled people over the last decade killed themselves after having, their interviews for whether they should be allowed benefits or not, being told that they're going to have their benefits taken away from them. People are appalled by that. People were appalled by the bedroom tax. I don't pretend that there wasn't anti-welfare sentiment back in 2010 or whatever. But the pendulum has swung. Again, Jeremy Hunt's doing this because there are people in the Conservative Party who are briefing against him, trying to get him out of being Chancellor of the Exchequer. He's not doing this because it's a vote winner.
But he is going to offer a £2.5 billion package for talking therapies, a universal support scheme, help with debt addiction and relationship problems, for example. And this scheme, you're not going to lose your benefits automatically, but if you're shown not to have even tried for 6 months and then a period of 18 months, then you've got to do a work experience placement if you want access to benefits, if you want access to state services like free prescriptions you mentioned, dental care, legal aid. Claimants of children or disabilities aren't included in this. That there are going to be people who say, actually, that's common sense, isn't it? If you're not going to engage in the process, then you don't get to benefit from it.
Well, what's really interesting, right, is that the headline sounds so much more aggressive than the detail, and that's why I would say that this is primarily a political ploy. It's something for Jeremy Hunt to show the right wing of the Conservative Party, don't worry, I'm not too much of a centrist. I am on your side. What I would say, though, is that when you start talking about taking away people's prescriptions, then you're talking about people who, there will be people who are so desperate emotionally in terms of their family dynamics that, actually going to work experience feels like an impossible thing to do. That person then has their free prescriptions taken away from them. They definitely can't afford prescriptions. They start to have really major health problems, quite apart from the terrible headlines that produces. That obviously puts enormous pressure on public services. And this is the thing about austerity, right? When you start cutting away at things that sort of supposedly are optional, then actually you end up putting huge pressure on the services of last resort, and that's the NHS and the cops.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. That's Richard Power Sayeed.